Welcome to The Author Show, where we feature new authors and books, from fiction to self-help and everything in between. You'll find it all at theauthorshow.com. That's theauthorshow.com. And now let the show begin.
Hello and welcome back to the show. This is your host, Don McCauley. Today we're welcoming your program author Steve Bassett, and he is the author of Love in the Shadows. Before I bring in today's guest, a quick reminder that selected interviews are available at our website, as well as on major platforms like Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, and many more. Steve, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you, and I hope the same for you.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Well, for 35 years, I was a working journalist. I describe myself as a news scribbler because I never really took myself seriously. My job was just to report the news. After 35 years as a journalist for newspapers, then the Associated Press, where I was a special investigative reporter for years in San Francisco. And from that point on, I made the jump because of money and two small children to CBS News in Los Angeles, where eventually I became the producer of the top-rated late evening television show, the 11 o'clock report. Then leaving the networks, I went into independent documentary production, which earned me 3 Emmys, including one for a CBS documentary, The Abused Woman, and an award that I treasure more than any others, the first medallion award from the California Bar Association for the pursuit of justice in reporting. Right now, it's all serious literary writing and made necessary when I was diagnosed with wet macular degeneration, turned almost blind in one eye, partially blind in the other. And of course, when you can't see your word processor keys or drive a car, you were no longer good material for news reporting. So for almost 20 years now, I've been concentrating on literary writing.
So tell us about your book.
Okay. Love in the Shadows is the final book of the Passaic River Trilogy. It takes a look at domestic violence using material and interviews that I collected from real people in real circumstances. It tells the story of several victims of violence and what their reaction was, what official reaction, legal action was taken, if any, and what revenge was taken by the abused victims to get back at their batterers and where this led. There are diverse characters, including a mafia made man, a paid murderer who kills on order, but will never touch a woman because only cowards hit women, who join in an unlikely and crazy scheme with 4 abused women to take revenge on elite people who have escaped either social stigma or legal proceedings, penalties for their battering, in 2 cases for decades.
Now, who did you write your book for specifically? Who's your target audience here?
The target audience can be segmented by the teenager who may have been exposed to domestic violence in her home, the young adult from 18 to 32 who is now forming life patterns that will be carried throughout their lives, women from 18 to 32 or 35 who may have been abused or fear abuse and how they can avoid it, and then grandparents, the 50-year-olds who have turned a blind eye and kicked under the rug clear evidence that there are members of the family that have suffered abuse and they can no longer turn their back on a face-to-face confrontation with the family member who is the abuser. So it's a segmented audience from late teenager through the loving grandparents.
So, could you say there's any type of central message or perhaps underlying theme that you would say runs throughout your book?
Yeah, the underlying message is you can't kick domestic violence under the rug and hide it. It has to be confronted, often painfully, And if not, it will only get worse. Evidence, as I point out in the book, that little slap on the face that becomes a punch or hard slap across the face, sometimes starting only during a domestic argument that starts with heated verbal agreement and then turns to physical abuse. And what are the signs that show that things will not coalesce and become better? They will only get worse.
So if you were asked to compare your book with any book out there we might already be familiar with, which book would it be and why?
None currently. And I'm not saying that as some sort of an ego boost, but I can find none currently. The one that comes closest is Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale that has been re-released for a current television series, but was originally published in 1985. I'd like to note here that my first book dealing with this subject, The Battered Rich, was published in 1980, 5 years before Atwood's book, which tells readers that this is a subject that's long troubled me. And then when you throw in the Emmy Award-winning Abused Woman documentary, it's also one that I spent a lot of time, a lot of research to get it right. And what I've discovered comes out loud and clear in Love in the Shadows through its characters, their circumstances, many of them adapted from real-life characters. In fact, almost all of them adapted from real-life characters that I have interviewed earlier in my career.
So tell us briefly about a couple of characters in the book.
They are diverse. We could start with the mafia hitman, a murderer, whose Sicilian parents taught him from an early age that hitting a woman is something only a coward does. So we have a character who murders on orders from his mafia underbosses, who has never struck a woman, who hears through an attorney that there are 4 women out there that are tired of being kicked around and are looking for someone to exact revenge on men, especially men in the elite social status who have gotten away with their domestic views, sometimes for decades. They want them to be avenged. And he is the man who, out of nowhere, says, okay, I'll work with you. And then on orders from them, rather than a mafia boss, he goes out and starts beating up former domestic abusers. Another character would be the Homicide police chief, who discovers for the first time that the domestic abuse, where it involves well-known, rich, elite citizens in Newark, that his department, with its untrained detectives, is going to be the dumping ground for domestic abuse cases. He turns to a psychiatrist and learns just how widespread domestic abuse among the wealthy is, but is always hidden because of the connections of the abusers. He sets out on a self-imposed mission to find out how the hell am my department, to deal with cases where there will be extreme political and social pressure to bury it.
So, was there a character or scene that you could say was your favorite?
Yes, my favorite would be Margie. Margie is a woman who, while her husband, who she loved very much, was drafted by the Marines, was serving in the Pacific, she took on war work, and during 3 years of his absence, became first a welder, a hot riveter, and then finally, the most arduous task, the operator of an overhead lift that moved steel plates in the shipyard into position on the assembly line. She developed muscles and could easily be the model for what became what I term in my book, and it's a creation of mine, that muscular feminism. And as a muscular feminist, she decided she would no longer take any abuse, which she was getting on a regular basis in the shipyard where she worked. And then ultimately, when her husband came back, couldn't find work, and started abusing her, she fought back with her fists, punching him to the point where he didn't stop, stalked her, and finally called it quits and re-enlisted in the Marines. She is a true heroine and an example of what women can do when they no longer accept the false premise that the man is the boss, and if his orders are broken, resulting in violent reaction on his part, then so be it. That's the way the world turns.
So what's been your most rewarding experience since publishing your book?
Quite frankly, Don, my first rewarding experience came before I wrote Love in the Shadows, the final book of the trilogy. It came after I completed the first book of the trilogy, Father Divine's Bikes, and I started getting literary awards in various genres, everything from crime mystery to crime fiction to noir fiction, convincing me for the first time that I was no longer a new scribbler, but yes, could possibly be a good literary author.
So in your opinion, who should buy your book?
The book primarily would be of prime interest to men and women who were part and parcel of domestic abuse situations. If this is the case, a woman can read the book and, if still being abused, could see how the abuse factor can be handled, often legally through lawsuits or divorce, or by return violence, as in the case of Margie. Don't take anything from the man who is your partner. Return with the ammunition on hand. As I say, that could be legal, it could be physical, but never let it get to the point where one of my characters, fed up with what her renowned surgeon husband had been doing to her for decades, pumped 3 bullets into his back, killed him, and that was her solution.
Do you have a website?
Yes, I have 2 websites. I have one, Author Steve Bassett, which is my newest website, bringing everything up to date, and also bringing things up to date, but not quite as thorough as Author Steve Bassett, is Steve Bassett, no apostrophe S, SteveBassettWorld.com.
Well, this has been just great. Our guest today has been Steve Bassett, and he is the author of Love in the Shadows. Steve, thanks very much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
This is Don McCauley wrapping up another edition of the Author Show. Go out there, buy the book today, and please share this interview with your friends so they too have the opportunity to discover our guests and their work. The Author Show can be accessed at any time at theauthorshow.com. And for easy access to the show on your mobile devices, just download our app in the App Store or Google Play Store through the QR code on our website. And whether you're an author who would like to be featured or a reader in search of new books to read, the Author Show is a great place to start. Check us daily as we continue to introduce wonderful authors of very interesting books on The Author Show.
Thanks for listening to The Author Show. Find out more about authors and their work at theauthorshow.com. theauthorshow.com. Tune in next time to another great author on The Author Show.